This is the WellFounder podcast.
So, welcome to the show, Ryan. It's an
Thank you.
absolute pleasure having you on.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on. And we're going to be talking about something super, super cool today, which is branding. I'm a big branding person myself, more on the personal branding side, which is kind of stuff you touch on.
Mhm.
But before we do, could you introduce yourself to our audience? Tell us who you are, what you do, and how you go into entrepreneurship.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Ryon Jason, and I am the founder and CEO of 171 Branding Agency. We were founded in 2020, and I'll get into how that came about in just a moment. But I've spent most of my career in corporate America and corporate space, and I'm originally from Detroit. And as with most people in that city and in that area, I got my start in automotive. So I spent some time with Mercedes-Benz, had a really, really cool assignment. I was on the AMG special vehicles team and on the branding and marketing side of that. So that was a very small team. At the time, I think there was maybe 5 of us, and we were responsible for all of the branding and the marketing around their performance line, which would be AMG, their ultra luxury line, which would be the Maybach, and then the even more specialized line, Guard, which is their ballistic proof lineup. So our team was responsible for the branding and marketing of those products in that portfolio. And then I went on to join Ford Motor Company and held a number of roles in the marketing and sales division, but largely focused on marketing for a number of years, and then was ultimately tapped and asked to join the Lincoln Motor Company during a very pivotal time in their career. And some people were familiar with the work that I had done with Mercedes, and so they thought, and I agreed, that it would be a good fit for me to join the Lincoln Motor Company and, contribute to the global rebranding of the Lincoln Motor Company. So I did that for a number of years, and then I ultimately decided to pivot and switch gears a little bit. So not only did I exit or make my departure from the automotive industry and luxury automotive in particular for the time being, but also focused on an entirely new aspect of marketing. So I left Ford Motor Company and Lincoln Motor Company and went into entertainment and hospitality with NBCUniversal, more specifically Universal Parks and Resorts. So that was an entirely new industry and an entirely new focus for myself. But as I mentioned, I also shifted gears as it pertained to marketing. So like most marketers up until that point, I had really focused on a singular brand or a singular product at any given time. With partner marketing, which was my new responsibility, the focus was multiple brands simultaneously in singular campaigns or marketing or branding initiatives. So focusing on multiple brands at one time. And that really led me to build and flex that strategic and creative muscle, right? Focusing on multiple brands simultaneously as opposed to a singular brand. And then in 2020, I was approached by a group of hospitality executives and developers and asked to join their team. They wanted me to partner with them on this new luxury. Well, it wasn't luxury at the time. It was upscale resort hotel development portfolio that they were building. And they were familiar with a lot of the brand work that I had done with the brands that I previously mentioned, as well as the design work that I had done with those brands, because everything is interconnected. And we can talk about that a little later, maybe. But, branding is what you know about a company or a brand, and what you feel about them through experiences and just, in your soul and in your gut and both through physical experiences and then also past experiences, interactions with advertisements, interactions with experiential, so on and so forth. All that comes together to form what is branding. And so they were familiar with the work that I had done with these previous brands and thought that there was a lot of connective tissue and interconnectivity to what they were trying to do in the hospitality space. Um, it was very attractive to me because my father's side of the business, I'm very, very close with my father, and he's a hero of mine. And so, like my father, I will say this, I kind of emulated him and replicated my entire career after him to a degree, because
Mhm.
he was a um, uh, corporate executive and then ultimately made the shift and became an entrepreneur. And not only was he a corporate executive, he was an advertising executive and
Oh,
then
wow.
became an entrepreneur. But everybody, I say that kind of loosely, but everybody on his side of the family were entrepreneurs. My grandfather was an entrepreneur for like 90% of his life and career. Both of my uncles are entrepreneurs. My grandfather's siblings, he had 8 brothers and sisters. I think they were mostly all entrepreneurs. So this was kind of like deep in me, somewhere in my soul. It had been stirring. And so this opportunity to do something that I thought was very cool, but I would never get an opportunity to do, build and develop and own upscale resort hotels and do that focused on an area that I had spent my entire career focused and dedicated to, which was branding and design and things of that nature. It was just a great opportunity and too good to pass up. So that's my story. And I've just been really fortunate to have these moments in my career that some would say are once in a lifetime moments. You know, like with Mercedes-Benz and the Maybach, that product and that portfolio had been removed from the US market for 40 years before my team and I reintroduced it and rebranded it. Right. So, in order for that to happen again in our lifetime, they would literally have to stop selling that vehicle tomorrow, wait 40 years, and then bring it back. And then you would have to be fortunate enough to be on the team of, at the time, again, 5 or 6, it's probably grown now, but be on the team to rebrand, remarket, and reintroduce that. So that's a once in a lifetime opportunity. And then with the Lincoln Motor Company, you know, in its 100-year history, it's only intentionally rebranded one time. And that's, you know, during the time that I was with the company. So these things don't happen very often. And then most people are not approached, just seems like kind of out of the blue by a group of investors saying, hey, we've seen what you've done over here, we'd like you to do it over here. Do you have any interest? Yeah, I do have an interest. As a matter of fact, I thought it was one of the coolest careers I could imagine, but I just, a kid from Detroit, didn't imagine it being for myself. So these are like 3 times within my career that I've been presented with an opportunity to do these once in a lifetime things.
Is amazing. That is such an extensive career right there, and you've got a really deep background in this branding, and particularly in the automotive industry. Like when you mentioned Detroit, I was just thinking there's two things I know about Detroit, and that's the automotive side of things, and then
Yep.
Eminem. Those are the two
And then
things I know
Eminem.
about Detroit.
And don't forget Motown. I'm sure you're familiar with
Oh,
Motown,
oh yeah,
right? Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
Motown, yeah,
That's
yeah.
right.
That's
Now
so.
you know 4 things
There
in
was
171.
171. There we go. Four things.
Which, by the way, so
Yeah.
171 stands for 1701, which was the year that Detroit was founded as a city. So it's kind of my
I
homage to my
see.
city, right?
Huh.
Yeah,
Because I always like to know how the name came about. You get some really creative names, especially in the marketing agency side of
yeah.
things. And I was actually going to ask you about that. That is very, very, very interesting. Very interesting. So then there was a time, the Maybach and the AMG. I don't know about more about AMG, but specifically Maybach became, because I'm a hip hop head anyway. So there was a time it became prominent in the hip hop world.
Hmm.
Did you have anything to do with that, or was that something before or
No,
after you?
I can't say
Okay,
that that's something that developed organically because
okay,
by the time it had become part of, um, the culture, I
mm.
had moved on to Ford Motor Company. So I was really
Ah,
involved with the reintroduction and the rebranding. But I can say that because of the way that the vehicle was designed and obviously the price point, lent itself to a little bit of that aspirational status, but also because of the way that we branded that vehicle and reintroduced it to the US market, that kind of laid the foundation for what it ultimately became, which was this symbol of the culture.
So let's talk about 171 then.
Mhm.
How do you manage moving from? I guess that's kind of like I wouldn't say seamless transition, but how going from corporate
Mhm.
to doing your own thing now, is there any how did you make that seamless, or did you stick to the same clients, or did you work with the automobile clients, or how did that work basically?
Yeah, so it was an unintentional evolution, if you will.
Mm,
So I talked about the opportunity and as it was presented to me. And the entire purpose of 171, at least initially, was to be an internal outfit for our resort hotel developments, right? Focused
I see.
purely on the branding and the design of our resort hotels. And here's what happened. So we were developing these brand campaigns and these design proposals, and we were presenting them to the global flags. Flags are the hotel brands that we were partnered with, right?
I see.
And so they said, uh, there must have been a miscommunication because you're supposed to be designing upscale hotels, and these are clearly luxury hotels and resorts. And we
Mm,
said, no, we know, but I've always been good. And so, therefore, the organization has always been good at maximizing the budget and optimizing the opportunity, right? Even in my personal life, you know, now, there's just some things you can't afford to do, but if you can afford to do some things, then my perspective is, do it right. So find a way to do it right, and that's what we were doing. We were taking the budget and we were saying, we need to make it exceptional. We have this amount of money. We need to make the experience exceptional, not for us, but for our guests. And so we did that, and we said, yeah, we know how much money we have, and we know what the objective is, but this is what we're going to do, and they loved
mm,
it. And so what the flags ultimately said was, well, if you can do that, let's elevate it. Let's
mm,
forget about the upscale. You're now in the luxury space, and we're going to give you luxury brands. Great. We love that. So word kind of got out about what we were doing. And then we started getting approached by other global flags, right? And they were
mm,
saying, hey, you should build with us. So we were signing, whatever it is we needed to sign and adding those brands to the portfolio, the prospective portfolio as well. Word continued to get
mm,
out. And then fellow hoteliers were contacting 171 and said, hey, I heard what you were doing over there. I've seen this, I've seen that. Didn't ask how they saw it. Okay. Because these things were still in development. But hey, saw this, heard about this. Do you think that you could do the same for us? So then we started taking on these hospitality clients. And then most recently, and this
mm,
is a very recent development, word continued to get out, and we started getting contacted by clients, prospective clients at the time, outside of the hospitality industry, outside of that sector.
mm,
And we very recently made the decision to take on clients across all sectors, and provide
mm.
branding solutions to those clients. So
That
that's
is
the
very,
evolution.
very yeah, that
Yeah.
it's a very interesting evolution, especially going from hoteliers to where you are now, which I am very interested to know. How then do you work with clients then? You say branding solutions. Yeah, what does that mean? As in, I know branding is this very broad uh,
Yeah.
offering because it
Yeah.
could be anything from. But you tell me how do you work with clients? What problems do you help them solve? Stuff like that.
So we optimize our client's brand positioning. So earlier I talked
Mm,
about how everything is interconnected when it comes to branding.
mm,
So we're not focused on just logos or just websites or
yeah.
even just experiential. All of these things inform the audience's perspective of the brand. And so therefore we provide solutions across that entire discipline, if you will,
Mm,
right? I read something yesterday that was really it just caught my attention. It was something very simple, but that was the beauty of it. The beauty was in the simplicity. And it said that marketing is communication. It's what you say to the audience, but branding is how they feel about the
Mm.
company, right? It's about what they feel and what they know. And all of that is informed by all of these different things. And so, we don't necessarily focus on the communication. We can do brand campaigns, which have advertisements and things of that nature in them, which have that communication aspect. But we largely focus on making sure that your brand resonates with the audience. And so what we found is that most large global organizations have figured this out, or at least they think they have, right? And most of them have, to be fair. But they small to medium sized businesses are still in that growth phase, still in that development phase, and those typically tend to be our clients.
I see. Yeah, that is clearer now. So, in terms of making sure that their message, when you say resonates with the client, so
Mhm.
I guess to put it in layman's term, you want to hear the message and then come to you to buy stuff from you. Would that be like the a simplistic way of putting it?
Yeah, I mean that's part of it. I think that's
Okay.
more on the marketing side because you're presenting
Ah.
this message. Really what branding is about is making sure that there is this connection between the audience and the brand or the company, right? So, how do you
Okay.
feel about that company? Are you
Okay.
drawn to that company beyond what we've said in whatever advertisement? Do you say, I really like that company? I want to represent that company in one way or the other. That company represents me. That's
Hmm.
branding,
Hmm.
right? And part of how that is um, uh, experienced can be through marketing, can be through the communication, but it's also because of some of these larger elements and aspects as well.
It makes sense now. And what you say it's very important, especially when you're competing with other brands in the industry. Like a good example I like to use is sometimes I go to the well, we all do supermarket to buy a product, but there's the time I was asking myself, why do I keep buying this one? They
Yeah, yeah,
pretty
yeah.
much do this the same thing, but I always go to this one, and that's because I just like it. I like the company. I like it's kind of like I like it. I guess that's what branding does to
That
your
is that
customers,
is what branding
basically.
does.
Yeah.
Here's a perfect example. Um,
Yeah.
when I don't know if you've ever done this, you likely have, even if you don't realize it. A company may not have the best product, right?
Mm,
But you're so drawn to them that you buy it anyway,
mm.
right?
Apple.
I'll use that grocery example, or maybe
Yeah.
they don't have the lowest price, but you're
Yeah.
so drawn to that company and to that product and to that brand that you um, purchase it anyway, right? So you're buying orange juice. Yeah, there's cheaper orange juices, but you like this orange juice. You don't just like this orange juice, but you may like the packaging and you may like the fact that it's organic and you may like the fact
Mm,
that 5% of the proceeds go to this and that. All that starts to uh, create and inform the brand. You may like the
mm,
way that that brand interacts with you, whether it's on a website or your
yeah.
mobile or whatever the case may be. You look at the advertisements, you're like, oh man, this is really speaking to me, and so
Yeah.
you buy that. And it's just more than the product itself, and it's more than the price itself. And when you can say, I'm buying this because, yeah, those two things are important, but there are other elements as well. Those other elements are really part of the brand experience.
Makes a lot of sense. And as you said, the brand that might not have the excuse me the best product, but people keep still buying it.
Yeah,
Apple, the iPhone. Yeah, I don't know which side of the fence you are, but they a lot of
perfect
people
example.
love their products, and I guess they've nailed the brand. So how do you then work with clients to create that feeling or get people to love their brands? Is there some science behind this, or have you got like some kind of a framework?
I mean, there is a science behind it, but you can't be too rigid, right? So we are a
Mm,
bespoke agency, and one of the benefits of working with a bespoke agency is that all of the solutions are customized and tailored to the client, right?
I
So
see.
there are some major tenets, but we're not entirely rigid in our approach. So what I would say is we take all of the solutions that we provide, and if we were to distill them into three verticals, you would have um, creative strategy, and then you would have campaign development, and then experiential design. I think all of the
Mm,
solutions that we offer would probably fit within one of those three verticals. Okay. And then the first step, and you can learn more about that if you were to visit our website or, schedule a call or whatever. We could talk about, what each one of those verticals truly is and what solutions are within those verticals and what have you. But the first step in the process is learning about the client, learning about the brand, any challenges they may have, any competitive advantages they may feel they have, so on and so forth.
mm,
And then once we have a general understanding and also what their objectives are, right? That's important to understand what they are hoping to accomplish. That doesn't mean that we may not identify other opportunities that they hadn't identified or thought of, but it's important that you also, in that discovery or discussion, you learn what's really important to them, because that's what's of the utmost importance. From there, we move on to competitive intelligence. So we learn about the market, we learn about the competition, we learn about the audience, we learn as much as we can to get a holistic view. And then
mm,
from there, we go deeper into the brand and we perform a brand audit, right? And so we say, how well does the brand in its current state line up against all of these learnings that we now have because of these prior steps? From
mm,
there, we look at the three verticals and we say, we need solutions from this vertical, and this vertical, or maybe just this one, or maybe all of them. It just really depends on where the brand and the company is in its life cycle. Um, we obviously develop and execute those solutions. And then it's about the evaluation and optimization. So once it's executed, you don't just walk away and say, oh, done. You have to make sure that it is effective and make sure that it is performing to the best of its ability. And that is an ongoing process, right? Because markets change, competitions change,
mm.
your audiences change. So that's an ongoing process. But the other, I would say, common uh, trait, or not really trait, but the common exercise that is interwoven throughout the process and is the constant is communication. Making sure that we stay in constant communication with the client so that we remain aligned in every step of the process, and that what
Mm.
is ultimately delivered is something that the client can be proud of and that represents the brand, because authenticity is important.
Very, very interesting. That's very extensive what you guys do. Because, branding, like I said initially, people say branding agency, and sometimes it's very tough to explain, difficult to explain what they actually do. I like
Sure.
that you have this, framework of this process that you kind of take them through to get, and even up to managing the brand or the work you do with them as well to make sure that that's sticky. Very interesting. You mentioned the word the authenticity, and that's something you talked about pre this call. You say
Mhm.
you talk about the authenticity, creativity, and ingenuity.
Yeah.
Hope I'm saying those words. But
Yeah.
what did they mean to you, basically?
Well, they really should be the cornerstone of any brand, right?
Mm,
Those four, I think there were those four words, should not only represent the brand, but it should also be like the guidelines for the brand going forward. So,
mm,
authenticity is very personal, right? It's not being swayed by outside influences. It's kind of being very true to yourself in this case being the brand, right? Um, Creativity, and some of these, and people use these terms interchangeably sometimes,
mm,
which is okay. But if we're talking about the true technical definitions, there are some differences, right? And they're important to note. So creativity is thinking and doing things differently. I think we all know
mm,
that, right? Then you have innovation, and innovation is taking that creativity and doing something with it, right? Make sure there's something actionable that is a result of being different, right? And
Mm.
then ingenuity is slightly different. It could be taking that innovation and solving a problem, or just being clever enough to solve a problem. So then you can start to see how the definitions of those four words may be the same for everybody, or should be the same for everybody, but the output is different, right?
Mm.
If you're being truly creative, that means by definition, you have to be different from everybody else, right?
Yeah.
If you are, um, if you are focused on ingenuity, or if there's an opportunity for ingenuity, then that creative solution that you have needs to solve a problem. So then, by very definition, that problem has to exist, which means that you'd be doing something different than the other people. So the definitions may be the same, but the output should be very unique to your brand.
I like that. I like that a lot because I'm a very creative person myself, to a fault.
Mhm.
Sometimes I don't know when to stop being creative.
Same.
you know, but yeah. So I like how you've put it in terms of, like, especially even turning it into actionable, because of it needs to come up. There needs to be an outcome of that creativity. So I really like that. And now you also talk about sustaining and scaling this. That's something I was trying to get understand. Could you help us explain what do you mean by that in terms of sustaining and scaling these four words you've talked about?
Yeah. So when you talk about sustaining and scaling, I think the easiest thing to do is really focus on those things which you have a direct impact, right? Regardless of outside conditions, right? And
I
the
see.
I say it's easy to do, but for many it is not, and understandably
Mm,
so. But authenticity, right? Again, staying true to yourself, not being unduly influenced by outside forces. Um, that is important. And then creativity, thinking and doing things differently. That's also very important. And I think the brands that do that, because brands don't necessarily always have to solve a problem, right, in
mm,
order to be successful. The ones that typically have devout followings and the longest lifestyles, in my experience, from what I've observed, focus on those two aspects, or those two tenets, right? They focus on authenticity and remaining true to themselves, and they focus on creativity, right? And,
mm,
and standing apart and doing things a little differently. And what I have found is that um, with branding and marketing, with the evolution of technology, a lot of brands and companies really focus on the data, and they just focus solely on the data, right? And here's and the data is important. Please don't mistake that. But here is where, in my opinion, the industry is kind of stalled a little bit. When I say the industry, I'm
mm.
talking about marketing and advertising and branding. There's so much focus on the data, there's no true focus on the creativity any longer, right? Because everybody
Interesting.
is so focused on the data that they are um, reaching the audience in the same way, the same platforms, the same channels, the same metrics that define the audience. They're going after the same people, and they're going after them in the exact same way because that's what the numbers tell them to do. Problem is, when
Yeah.
you do that, it's hard to differentiate yourself, right? The key to success is using that data and pairing it or marrying it with creative output. And that's
Mm,
an area where 171, in my opinion, excels, right? We
mm,
understand the value of the creative output and pairing that with the data, and not relying solely on the data to influence strategy, and even more dangerously, just in influence the creative output. You know, um, perfect example. The example I always use, and I take no credit for this, 'cause I wasn't involved at all. But if you look at the insurance industry, right,
Mm.
Progressive and Geico, I can't remember which, but one of those two companies from where I sit were the first to really change the way that entire industry is marketed, right? I'm sure, because I've been with big companies most of my career, I am sure that they studied a tremendous amount of data, but they used that data to do something very cool. Had they relied exclusively on the data, you wouldn't have gotten flow, or you wouldn't have gotten with Progressive, or you wouldn't have gotten the caveman with Geico. I can't remember which came first, but one of those two companies said, now that we know everything we need to know about the market and the competitors and the audience or whatever, we're a great group of people, and we're fun and we do things differently. It's time for us to show ourselves to the audience instead of kind of being one of many. We're going to be one of one. And they came out with, again, either Flow or the Cavemen, to resounding success. And then what happens? Now, every single brand in the insurance sector has some type of comedic element, some type of zany element in their marketing and advertising. But the true innovator, the truly creative, and the truly brand authentic, not saying that these other companies aren't authentic. They may be, fun and lighthearted and whatever, however they would define themselves. But the one that truly changed the way that industry is marketed and branded and communicated, um, is, again, either Geico or Progressive. And that is because they didn't rely solely on the data.
That's such a very good example. And that's typical. You're spot on when you say a lot of people just focus on the data, especially in marketing.
Yeah.
Everybody's talking about ROI, ROI, and all that stuff. So
And
they,
it's
they
and
try
it's
to,
very important, but it
yeah,
cannot be the end all be all. It has to
yeah,
inform something, let's call it greater, right?
yeah,
It can't just
yeah,
be the data says do this, go here, so I'm going to do this and go here, because everybody is doing that and going there.
yeah,
So how do you separate yourself?
yeah. That is true. That is very, and I love the way you say you need to combine that data with innovation and creativity, because
Yeah.
of that's me, that's speaking to me, right? Because
Yep.
when you have that, because I'm leaning towards more of the creative side, and sometimes I neglect the data. But when you can combine those two things, you create something really magical. I guess this is what great companies do, like you were saying with the Geico, and that find that perfect balance between the data and the creativity, basically. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I like that. I was going to ask what makes you guys unique, but you've talked about it in terms of this is what you're able to do, and
Yeah.
that is really awesome, because you need to be able to stand out in these days where the how do they put it, entry level or point of entry, where it's very easy for everybody to start anything or get into most things these days. So you need to be able to stand out somehow. I want to
Yep.
go back a little bit though, to now that you've broadened who you work with. Could you describe a company that actually might need your services? What does that company look like, basically?
Yeah. So I would say again that there's small to medium sized
Yeah.
businesses. Obviously, there's large enterprises that could benefit, but they typically have either internal organizations focused on brand and marketing, or they
Mm,
work with and they have established relationships with very large global agencies, which is fine,
mm,
right? It's the smaller or the earlier stage, I'll call them earlier
okay.
stage companies or brands that are typically attracted to us. And that is because they are interested in scaling, but they
Mm,
understand that in order to do so, they need to really effectively define, articulate, and represent their brand, right? You
Mm,
can reach a certain stage in the development without that focus. You could have a really great
mm,
product. You could come in and undercut the market. You could be first to market. There's all these factors that could influence um, your success getting you from A to B. But if you want to get from B to Z, there comes a point where you realize, and if you want to stay in existence, right? You don't want to just be a flash in the pan. There comes a point where you realize that um, how your brand is defined and represented and experienced by others is paramount. And
mm,
so it's for those companies, those clients, those brands that have come to that realization, don't necessarily have the resources, however you would define resources, internally to do it themselves, and don't necessarily have the interest or the um, financial wherewithal to partner with these large global agencies because number one, they're extremely expensive, but then also there's this fear, whether it's justified or not, I can't say, that when they go to these large global agencies, they will just become either a number or not a focus because that same agency has a client that is a global superpower. So their efforts are concentrated there as opposed to on them. And with 171, because again, we're a boutique agency, um, you get that personalized attention. The other great thing about 171, which clients in my experience have found refreshing, is that we know we do very important work, but we don't take ourselves very seriously. And so you kind of get that sense when you visit our website or when you get on the phone with us or you work with us, very, very important work. But we're certainly not stuffy. And then the other great thing about 171, and I can't speak for other boutique agencies, but what I think is um, an attractive aspect of how we're comprised is that um, we are comprised of leaders and marketers with experience across all sectors and with major
mm,
companies. So, we talked about my background, but in addition, we have people who have experience leadership and management with the Googles of the world, the Walmarts of the world,
mm.
the Pfizers of the world, the Finastras of the world, and the list goes on. Um, and so, therefore, we have experience in almost every industry and every sector, so we can speak with authority as well.
That makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. It helps when you have such a diverse team and a well experienced team as well. Then you could
Yeah,
cover
absolutely.
much ground. Mm.
Absolutely.
Ryan, as we wrap up an awesome, awesome interview, you've given us a really good deep dive into branding and what you guys do over there at 171.
Thank you.
I always like to ask my guests for one final tip to leave us with. If you could share with our audience something
Yeah.
that we could take from this interview and go and maybe implement in our own businesses, what would that be?
Yeah, very simple. Don't underestimate the value of branding. It is the
Mm,
lifeblood of your company. A lot of times, especially when times get tough, I see companies, large and small, focus on all of these other disciplines and kind of abandon marketing. Branding obviously falls under marketing. So they kind of maybe abandon is too tough of a word, but they certainly shift the focus to whatever degree. And it's during those times that marketing and branding in particular are of the utmost importance. That's where you really need to um, ensure that your audience is loyal and will support you not just today but tomorrow because that's how
mm.
you make your way through these difficult times. So in good times and in difficult times, branding is important, and again, like I said, it's really the lifeblood of any company and its success and longevity.
Love it. Beautiful way to wrap up. And you, you said something that really got me thinking. because I was thinking I've never come across a chief branding officer before. I know I've seen a lot of CMOs and
Yeah.
marketing this and marketing, but I've never seen like a. And then you say it comes under marketing. Okay, that explains that. Ryan, this has been an awesome interview. Where can our viewers go learn more about you guys, check out your work, and possibly work with you?
Well, thank you. Again, I really appreciate the time today and the opportunity to come speak with you and your audience. You can find more information about 171, obviously, by visiting our website, 171.com. That's the number one, the word 70, the number one.com. There's a lot of information on our site, and I think the site's actually entertaining as well. So check that out. But then you can also reach us on LinkedIn. So you can reach me personally and connect with me. But of course, the agency also has a page on LinkedIn as well. And those are probably the two best avenues.
Beautiful. Once again, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.